Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high income earners come to learn wealth building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into another episode of the Money Insights Podcast, where we talk all things money and business. My name's Christian Allen. He's Rod the Pod Zabriskie. Rod, what's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Although we're hitting a really kind of awkward time in our lives, my wife and I. I shouldn't say awkward.
Is it because you're getting old?
Well, it has to do with getting old. It's right in
Okay.
conjunction with that. But so we talk about how we have 7 kids, right? Well,
Frequently.
And sometimes you'll get mixed up. It's 18 or
7,
what number you'll
12,
throw out there.
42. Yeah.
But what's happening is our 5 oldest, soon, all of them will be out doing their own thing, adult things, and we'll
Holy
have the 2
smokes.
kids left.
I'm a little jealous, Rod. Although, can I just tell you, I have 5, 2 of my own, 3 stepkids, and they're on the same schedule. So half the time I have all the kids, half the time I have none of the kids.
So half the time you're jealous and half the time I'm jealous.
Yes, that's exactly right. No, I say it is fun to have the kids around though. Like,
Yeah,
there's like a youthful exuberance that's nice. On the other hand, you can't really like travel and do all the things you want to do. So it's an interesting time for you. Cool.
Yeah, and
I don't know whether to say sorry or congratulations.
Well, I'll say this: when our oldest was getting ready to leave the home, I had this like morning that I went through because it was like this phase of our lives that I really enjoyed, having the kids around, spending a lot of time together, doing cool things, and it's like, oh, this phase is not. It
phasing
wasn't like
out.
ending immediately, but yeah, it's moving.
Changing.
They're moving into a new phase of their lives, which is totally healthy. We encouraged it. I wasn't trying to keep them home.
Rod's gonna be a grandpa soon, I'm sure. Oh wait, you're already a grandpa.
Yeah, we're what 9 months in. So
man, you are okay. Life's changed a lot for you, Rod.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's worth congratulations. Then, despite the pain that goes through this change in phase, I congratulate you. Okay, good news, Rod. Today I'm going to give you the day off. We're not going to record much of anything, and the reason is because today we're going to play for our listeners. Hopefully you got a chance to go to the virtual summit that we put on recently. But if you did not, we are going to play our talk from that. We called it the Accelerated Path to Generational Wealth. And Rod, I just thought that it was a really fun topic, and we were able to build off a lot of the really powerful ideas and strategies and things that the other speakers had already been talking about. And so it just worked really nicely. Anyway, without further ado, Rod, unless you have anything, I'm just going to jump right into the Accelerated Path to Generational Wealth. The impetus for this presentation or talk is basically that over the last decade, since we started Money Insights, which we call the alternative wealth building firm for high income earners. Since we started the firm, we've met with literally thousands of high income earners. I don't know. We probably meet with 1,000 on average a year. So we probably met with 5,000 to 10,000 high income earning professionals who were looking to take things to the next level. And so what we wanted to do is extract what we believe to be the very best parts and see if we could provide a little bit of a roadmap. Now, we have our 10-step formula. This is going to be the accelerated path to generational wealth. And we really feel like it kind of simplifies, but really focuses on the most important and most impactful ideas, strategies, and wealth building tools that we have available to us. So with that said, Rod, by the way, Rod, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Okay. Usually when we do our pod, I have to ask how Rod the pod is. And he says, hey, and everybody's excited about that. So do you want to give us a hey, Rod?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Awesome.
It's funny. The other day, my wife says, are you just always great? Do you have to say that? And I'm like, well, I guess it's just kind of like my thing. I guess I am always great.
You're like, I'm so. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're great, Rod. It adds to the energy.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to do kind of our step by step. But before we get into the steps, let me just lay out kind of the agenda for what we're going to be talking about. So here we go. Step number one is you've got to maximize your already high income. Obviously, everything we're doing here is laser focused on high income earners. So this ends up being the starting point, where we draw our income from, what we do with it, how we position it to make the biggest impact. The second step is that we've got to incorporate leverage. Now, we put in conservative leverage because that's kind of like the phrase that we've, I don't know, earmarked as our own, right? Because we believe in leverage, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to go crazy, right? You've got to be smart about it. You've got to be thoughtful. We like the idea that if we incorporate conservative leverage, we're taking advantage of leverage as a principle and as a tool. We're not taking it over the top and ending up in a difficult situation. Okay, step three is that we have to invest in high quality alternative assets. So obviously the name of our event is focused on the alternative space. And Rod and I made a little bit of a shift. I guess it was probably between 10 and 12 years ago, where when we were originally started in the industry, we were focused on the traditional stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and basic, the traditional stuff that we hear about. And what we noticed relatively quickly, I don't know, maybe I'm a slow learner. It took me 5 to 6 years to figure it out, but I learned that I wasn't having much of an impact on people's lives. And the other thing I noticed is that when I did get an opportunity to meet with high income earners, people who were really excelling and were successful, more often than not, they were moving into the alternative space. And again, that opened up an entire new world for us. So we wanted to really focus on that. We're going to talk about investing in high quality alternative assets. And finally, you have to protect yourself. It's not as fun and sexy to talk about, but obviously not protecting yourself can get you stuck, and it'll stop you dead in your tracks if you're not prepared. Okay. And then finally, we're going to do the Q&A. So we'll leave time for a Q&A. Anybody that's interested, if you have questions throughout the presentation, just jot them down in the notes. And as we get to the end, we'll circle back and answer those. If we have a bunch of them, we can carry some of them over into our Q&A session at the very end, where we have all of the panel. And if we don't, then we'll just kind of roll through it. Okay, Rod. So why don't you kind of kick things off and talk about the kind of step one and why it's so important to maximize our already existing high income.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that both Sharon and Adam touched on kind of this dynamic, because it's not enough just to have a great income. So Christian has said we met with a lot of people who have high incomes, and I would say the people who become clients understand this principle, but we do meet with a lot of people who their spending matches their income, or maybe even outpaces their income. And having a high income, like, you worked hard for it, right? You are where you are because you worked hard, but the work isn't done. Let's just call it that, right? You feel like, hey, I deserve this, I've earned it, and great. Like I get it. Like especially these physicians who went through residency and worked their heinies off and earned next to nothing, and now they're getting the income. They're going to go spend it, right? But I would say that from day one, when you get that higher income, look at it closely, make sure that you're not just increasing your spending to match the income. Make sure you're earmarking dollars for investing, for the things that we're going to talk about here shortly.
Rod, did you just say Heine? Did you say?
I did.
I think you did. Okay. So, but can I just tell you, that's me. That's been my experience, right?
Yeah.
As we become more successful, as we get more money, it's really easy to increase our spending habits.
Yeah.
And can I just tell you, I don't think that that's all bad, right? Like we make more money because we want to be able to do additional things and we want to have freedom and flexibility. The one thing I didn't mention at the beginning of our talk is that it's not just, well, so for some people, it's about creating generational wealth. For others, it might just be about creating financial freedom in the fastest possible time frame, right? Mm-hmm. Either way, we're going to be doing that. But like you're saying, it's not enough to have a great income. You have to actually know what you're going to do with that income And if you do, kind of going back to Adam's positioning, like it's incredible to think back on that. This will bring us into this our next point, which is keeping spending in check. Like if you position those assets, if you position your income in the right places, it doesn't have to be materially different in your life, and yet it can still be unbelievably impactful, especially when you take that over a long term. I mean, we talked about what happens in the later. I think Adam mentioned it was 65 plus that. Why can't I think of his name?
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett. Thank you. Generated the majority of his wealth. Like that's incredible. Yeah. So anyway, positioning assets is critically important. It's not enough to have a great income.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, the keeping the spending in check, I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what we just talked about. So then take a look on the right-hand side here. We're borrowing the same cash flow quadrant. Sharon talked about it earlier and kind of laid it out a little bit. But as we talk through this maximizing income piece here and get into some case studies and whatnot, we want to focus on the cash flow quadrant. So again, just to recap, the E stands for an employee. You're earning your income as an employee. S is self-employed. B is business owner, and I is investor. And again, we'll hit on these in more detail, but the create a business piece of it becomes huge because of the things that you can do with your income, as well as with taxes and a lot of other things that we'll hit on as we go. And again, that leads us to our last point here, to minimize taxes. We'll get into some things here as well, but if you just accept that you have to pay the taxes that the IRS tells you have to pay, then you're going to overpay. Do things, put pieces in place to make it so that you minimize what you pay. You'll most likely still pay. There'll be those who will say, no, you have to drive it to zero. And there are those who are doing that. But in your world, with what you can do, minimize the taxes.
So Rod, one of the reasons we put this create a business on our list, and it kind of seems like, almost when I look at it, it almost seems like out of place, maximize income and then create a business, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what we're going to do is kind of fill that gap, because what happens is that there's multiple ways to create income, right? Mm-hmm. I can create income as a W-2 employee, just like we talked about with our cash flow quadrant, or I can create cash flow as a business owner, as an investor. And basically what's going to happen here is, if you create the business, and Sharon hit on this, real estate's a business, right? So maybe I should kind of step back for a second and throw that out there. The business doesn't have to be what we traditionally think of. We're not saying like, okay, if you're a physician that works full-time in surgery, that you should also go open up a franchise somewhere, mm-hmm. right? Now, maybe you think that's a great idea and you could do that. But what we're suggesting is that you can create a business that is out of the things that you're already doing. We're going to get into this here in just a minute in a little bit more detail. Mm-hmm. But the primary point here is that creating a business, or through business income, has to be one of the two ways that I bring my income in. And the reason for that is because when I bring money in that way, there's a host of additional things that I can do from a tax standpoint that aren't available to me when I'm in the E portion of the quadrant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and the way that the cash flow quadrant was built is progressive. So in that E quadrant, it is W-2. Are there things that you can do to save taxes and things? Mostly it's things like 401k, right? There's not much. And the limits are, especially for a high income earner, really low. They're not going to do much to help you. When you move from the E to the S, the self-employed quadrant, then you can do more, right? Now you have business expenses, which allow you to do certain things tax-wise to save. The challenge, and again, Sharon hit on this, with anything on the left-hand side of the quadrant, you have to wake up every day and go to work in order to make things happen. If you're self-employed, you've now created some additional tax benefits for yourself, but you're your own employee still, right? You have to make things happen, which isn't all wrong. Like Sharon said, she does her passion. She continues to go to work every day, and she makes things happen on that, even in that S quadrant. But then when we move to the right-hand side of the quadrant, if you become a business owner and you're leveraging other people, other resources, so that you're growing your wealth without you necessarily having to show up every day, that's where you move to a different level. So the B quadrant, and then obviously in the I quadrant, that's what we do, right? If you invest in real estate, but again, you have to show up every day. It's an Airbnb, and you're running the whole show. You're doing all the upkeep, etc. You're a S, right? Don't think of yourself as an I, because you are self-employed. But when you move to the I quadrant, if you have that same Airbnb, but you've hired out the upkeep and the day to day and everything else, and you're spending your time out doing other things, then now you are in the I quadrant. It's the same investment, but it's how you approach the investment that tells you where you are in the cash flow quadrant.
Okay, Rod. So next we're going to get into a case study, and I love this case study. This is a client of ours that Jonah Mink that we've had for a long time, and he's just got an incredible story of success. And what's cool about it is that we've literally like watched it from I don't know. Let's see, he's been a client for maybe 6 or 7 years, something like that, and we've watched this progression, and it's been really incredible to watch. So thanks. Quick shout out to Jonah. Thanks so much for letting us use your story, and that's a great picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Jonah, when we first met him, he was a W-2 employee as a physician, but he'd caught the vision. He knew he wanted to change things. He knew he wanted to move over more into the alternative investing world, but he had been a W-2 employee, and pretty much all of the investing he had done up to that point was in the traditional side of things, in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, partially inside of the 401k side, but also even outside of that in after-tax dollars. But he knew he wanted to do something different. So next thing he did is he decided, hey, I'm going to start my own practice. Okay, I'm going to be a practicing physician, seeing patients. So he moved from the E quadrant, no longer living in that world. Now he's moving to the S quadrant. So he's in a better place. He's self-employed. He now has a business. He can do different things from a tax standpoint. But again, he either shows up or the money isn't there at the end of the day, right? But it's progress. And then over the last several years, what he's been doing is developing a telehealth business. And as you know, with telehealth, you can do that from anywhere, right? So he splits his time in several different locations in the US and even in Israel. And he can do all of this as a business owner. Again, does he spend time in that business? Yes. But is he leveraging the resources of a lot of other people and systems to make a lot more of his time? Absolutely. And so this is where he moved from the S quadrant now to the B quadrant. And I put in, oh, go ahead. Did you have something?
Oh, no, I was just getting excited to talk about the fact that he also takes things to the next level by adding the level of profitability using the investment optimizer. But what I was thinking about, Rod, is that since we don't have a lot of context on the investment optimizer, we better do like a minute and 30-second overview of what that is so that people who haven't heard us know exactly, or at least they have a general idea of what we're talking about and know where they can go to learn more.
Absolutely. So, and Adam hit on this a little bit a minute ago. At a high level, basically what we're doing is we're adding an additional layer of profitability to your investing. So in Jonah's case, he is in that B quadrant, but he's also in the I quadrant where he invests in other things. Again, we'll get into more of what those types of alternative investments might look like. But when he does that, he flows the money through, again, what we call the investment optimizer. And specifically what that is, well, put it this way, when we meet up with a lot of people who are in the position where Jonah was when we first met him, the money that he was going to be putting into investments, he was kind of hoarding inside of a savings account, right? And that's pretty typical. Build up the money in the savings account, take that money, go out and invest it, create cash flow all that money back into the savings account, build it back up, and go out and do it again, right? I call it the opportunity fund, the place where you keep that money between deals. The reason we choose that is because of the safety and the liquidity of that account. So you might choose a money market or something like that, right? The problem is that while it's there, it's just not doing much for you, especially before last year. It was doing literally almost nothing, 0.1% or something. Now you might get a couple percent, but still that feels, it's really difficult when inflation is at 6, 7, 8, 10%. But your money when it's between deals is sitting there and earning even 2%. So what we do is with the investment optimizer, we set up a specially designed life insurance policy that gives you the safety and the liquidity. But what it also does is it gives you growth inside of the account. There's some guaranteed growth, and then there's also some dividends that are paid that are very consistent. that growth is tax-free, so that you're actually flowing the money. It's the same dollars flowing into the same investments, but by putting in the investment optimizer first, you're creating a place where you have that growth average of 5%. As interest rates keep going up, then we'll see higher than 5%, but 5% tax-free growth on those dollars. And what happens is that money goes into the account. That's called the bucket of the insurance policy. When we use it, we don't actually take the money out. We're able to use a loan against those dollars. That's the money we take out and invest. So you literally have your money sitting in the account, continuing to grow while you've loaned against it to go out and grow, build wealth elsewhere. Again, the same places you're going to invest anyway. And that's the arbitrage.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in our next section when we get into leverage. But I think that's a really good overview. So basically, a recap is, instead of using a bank account, we're using a specially designed life insurance policy that's generating a 5+% return, and we're going to use that to invest through because of the unique leverage opportunity that life insurance provides, as well as tax benefits in return. Okay, Rod, let's talk about, let's make sure we hit on minimizing taxes before we move on to our next one. So a couple of things to think about. Obviously, most people know this, and this becomes especially true as a high income earner, particularly if you're not at a place yet where you've learned how to minimize taxation. It's absolutely our largest expense, right? So especially if you haven't done some planning, sometimes like it's as much as 40 cents on the dollar that's just going out the window, right? So you have to be thinking about the potential of what that could represent. And that's what we wanted to help people do, is think about it in terms of, well, okay, it's not as simple as, actually, let me back up. If I want to build generational wealth, the dollars count, the money counts, right? And so what we want to do is suggest that if you're not doing the things necessary to minimize taxes yet, and obviously you'll get some great ideas from Tom here in the next couple hours, but if you're not doing that yet, make sure that you make it a priority, because it is the largest expense and it represents a massive opportunity cost over time, which Rod's going to go through right now.
Yeah. And when you think about that opportunity cost, it's for every dollar that you pay in taxes, in order to get that dollar back, you have to earn not just that, but the amount that it took to get there. So for example, if I have, in a minute here, we're going to show an example where if someone saved $50,000 in taxes, right? And what that looks like over time. If I save $50,000 in taxes, what that represents is not just the $50,000 that I have in my pocket. It's the 150 or whatever it was that I would have had to earn in the future to get that back in my pocket, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at an example here where if we said, hey, let's take it's a 40-year-old who kind of gets this thing figured out, is now in a place where they're saving taxes. If they hadn't have done that and they had paid an extra $50,000 a year for the next 20 years until they retire at age 60, what does that represent? It's obviously the 50 a year for 20 years, right? But it's not just that, it's what you could have earned on those dollars. So if we assume in this group a conservative 10% earnings rate compounded over the 20 years, when you get to the end of the 20, it's actually $3.1 million of money, wealth, that you would no longer have because you paid out that $50,000 a year in taxes over those 20 years.
That's insane. And we don't want to be crazy about it, right? Like we've heard stories about the iPad that costs like $1 billion. And so we don't want to take that necessarily to extremes. We realize that there is a way to do that. However, our experiences as we've been meeting with people, it's just so common that we'll call it fat, right? There's extra meat on the bones that could be looked at and worked toward reducing. Rod and I do that ourselves consistently and are working toward doing this exact same thing. So we really believe in this, and just want to make sure that people are considering the massive impact that taxes can play. And by reducing those, it gives us a huge opportunity to accelerate our path. Okay, absolutely. Rod, let's move on to step 2.
Okay, can I hit on one thing really quickly? This last point?
Sorry. Go.
The focus on tax savings and not just tax deferral. So we talked earlier about Jonah when he was a W-2 and putting money in his 401k or whatnot. That often is presented as if it's, hey, you're saving on your taxes, but it's not a savings. It's just, you're just pushing it down the road. You put that money in the 401k, you don't pay the tax today, but later when you're in retirement, you're taking that money out, that's when you'll pay the tax. So you push it down the road, and the hope is, or at least the conversation is around paying less tax later than you would if you did it today, which may or may not be true. If all of your plans come to fruition, then hopefully for most of us that actually wouldn't be true, that we pay lower tax when we're there. But that's the story that's at least told. What we're talking about here is actual tax savings. So not just pushing it down the road, putting it in a place where you'll pay a tax later, but actually creating tax savings where you're paying less in taxes today, and that's permanent. The IRS isn't going to come back later and say, oh, now you have to pay the tax.
This is Rod's favorite narrative. Nobody forget it. You want to make sure that tax savings are happening, not just tax deferral.
Yes, sir.
I like it. Okay. Sorry about the jump start, Rod. Okay. Nope. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about what we call conservative leverage. And really the key here is that if you want to build generational wealth, or if you want to accelerate your path to financial freedom, leverage is critical any way you shake it. But we want to make sure that we do it we want to be thoughtful about it. We want to be wise. We don't want to overextend ourselves. So first off, Rod, talk a little bit about point one. Not all risks are alike.
Yeah. And I think you kind of just hit on it. The reason we use conservative leverage is because there are ways to use leverage debt in a way that really benefits us. Adam is hitting on a system that is built around creating better systems, paying down leverage where you don't want it, putting it where you want it, where you can use it, having the HELOC or other lines of credit that you can access and use to your advantage. And again, you always want to be smart about it. We don't throw out the due diligence that we otherwise would have used when we're doing it, just because, hey, it's quote unquote free money. But we want to recognize that there's this concept of a risk adjusted return. We're going to talk about it again here in a minute in the alternative asset space. But risk adjusted return basically just means that we don't have to take on more risk in order to create a better return for ourselves. And leverage is the best place, the best example of doing that. And in our case studies that we'll talk about here in a minute, we'll really show you how that plays out. And
not only is it's also in the alternative space, right? So that component makes a big difference, because what's available to us in the traditional space is much more difficult on the average to leverage, right? There's a few places we can do it, but utilizing real estate, like almost every form that we purchase and invest in real estate in ends up being through leverage. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of thoughts here. Due diligence is always critical. That's kind of obvious, but it's amazing how often we see situations where people haven't done the due diligence that's necessary to make sure that they're connecting with good investors, good operators. If it's like a syndication or something like that, make sure you do the due diligence. Okay, Rod. So the thing that most people think about when they think about leverage is financial leverage. Mm-hmm. And the thought comes to my mind, and we're gonna show an example of this in a second. But if I just think about the difference between using real estate and mutual funds for the average person, mm-hmm. and whether I'm doing that through my TD Ameritrade just got bought, so my formerly TD Ameritrade account, or if I'm doing that through a qualified plan, the same thing applies. I'm usually not leveraging that in any meaningful way. So if my mutual funds get 7%, they get 7%. Mm-hmm. If my real estate, let's say that I put 20% down on it, now I have, and this is obvious, right? This is just math. We all know this. Yeah. But if I use my real estate and I put 20% down, I'm allowing that money to work off the entirety of that value. So just by doing that, like, it's kind of obvious, but the math is there. So you have to put it into place. Okay. We also want to emphasize the fact that there are multiple types of leverage that exist. We talked about financial leverage, the most obvious and most common, but one of the things that we extracted kind of as we were trying to build this is that most of the people who are ultra successful have ultra high net worth, successful businesses and lives in general, they're doing more than just leveraging their finances. They're also being smart enough to leverage time, talents, and synergy. And again, there's a lot of ways that this could play out, but time is way more valuable than money. And the faster that we learn that principle, the better off that we'll be across the board. That's been like eye-opening to me, because it's amazing just stepping back and seeing how much more I can get done just by being thoughtful and leveraging my time, but also leveraging other people's time, talents, and synergy. Rod, do you have anything else to add as it relates to the different types of leverage?
Yeah, maybe just with the synergy is by putting different things in place, we can make them work together. And when they work together, then it creates that leverage. So for example, I mean, Adam's shred method is a perfect example of that. We'll talk a little bit later here about a captive insurance company and when you combine that with another strategy. So just tuck that in the back of your brain, because when we come back to this, that's the synergy between two strategies. Either one of them is very valuable. And in both of the pieces, you go through a different thought process, different decision-making process when you implement it. But because you have both of them, when you put them together, then it makes a difference. The investment optimizer is another example of that, right? It adds an additional layer of profitability to the investing that you already are and will be doing in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because synergy, even that we sometimes think of it automatically as like human synergy, right? Mm-hmm. But in this case, we're talking about human synergy. That's true, but also could be synergy between ideas, strategies, thoughts. And those examples that you gave are really great examples of that. Okay, Absolutely. So next, Rod, we are going to get into our case study, and we're going to talk about the difference between investor A and investor B. We'll see who comes out better using debt and using no debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on this a little bit ago, but what we're going to do is we're going to say investor A uses no debt. So buys $100,000 piece of property, puts the whole full 100,000 down. He worked hard. He set the money aside. He has it. He's going to go buy $100,000 piece of property. So at the end of the day one, net worth is at 100,000. Okay. Investor B takes the same $100,000, but instead she goes and buys a property worth $500,000, uses her down payment, gets a $400,000 loan. At the end of day one, her net worth is the same, the 100,000, right? The equity in the property is 100,000 still, right?
So it's a tie, Rod. Just do this. It doesn't make a difference.
Yep. Right now we're good. Okay. But then time passes and we're going to look at the end of year one. So in the first year of ownership, if we look at investor A, let's say that he was able to produce 5% of cash off of his operations. Okay. Net after taking in the rents. Let's say the value of the property went up by 3%. So you add the 5 and the 3 together, his net worth went up to 108,000. Okay. With investor B, the same percentage, you apply the same percentages. She also produced 5% net cash from her operations, but because the property is 5 times as large, she returned 25,000 off of that. The appreciation went up 3%, but again, larger property, therefore, she went up by 15,000 on that. And she started with the loan, but she's paid down a portion of the loan and gained in equity an additional $5,900 off of that. So her net worth now went up from 100,000 to 145,902. And just so that everybody knows, that's a bigger number, right? So if you look at the end of the day in that first year, while investor A saw around an 8% ROI, and he was probably pleased with that, because of the leverage, that's the only difference between the two. Because of the leverage, investor B saw a 45% ROI in that first year. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Well, I can't think out loud very well when I mute. Okay, so I was just thinking out loud here, Rod. What's the downside? Let's just make sure we hit on both sides of this. What would be the downside to be considering as investor B? She looks great, by the way. She's like very confident in what she's doing. He's maybe a little on edge, but what would be the reason why? Is there any reason why you wouldn't, or what would be the reason to consider to not take on that debt?
Yeah, the people that I hear from in that camp, I think it's fear-based. They're concerned about what may happen if whatever, they don't have enough, they lose a renter, and so they don't have enough cash flow. So again, we use that word conservative leverage for a reason, because you don't want to leverage yourself to the hilt. You want to maintain liquidity. You want to have backup plans and still work very smart inside of the investments to make the most of the opportunities to create that growth in there. So don't take this as if this is the only thing that she's doing and all of her money is in that, because you absolutely want to go in and have some contingencies built into it.
Okay, here's the good news, Rod. It's really, really easy to plan for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to do it is keep cash on hand. If I keep cash on hand, I can always pay my bills. I can take care of the situations when a renter comes. So liquidity is the key. And as long as I do that, then adding that additional layer of profitability through, in this case, leverage makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And it can be what Adam talked about a minute ago too, about having a line of credit set up, whether it's against her primary residence or even against this piece of real estate that has some equity. By having a line of credit, now you have created some liquidity for yourself as well.
Okay, Rod, you didn't think that we could get through our presentation here without at least mentioning our core strategies. So we've talked a little bit about the investment optimizer and how to use it to add a layer of profitability. Next, we're going to talk about how to use the capital avalanche to basically bring conservative leverage into your world in a really meaningful and impactful way.
Yeah. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the capital avalanche. And again, I'll describe what that is for anyone who's not as familiar, and compare that against someone who uses the exact same product, but just not using the leverage. So here we go for investor A. She is starting up an index universal life insurance policy. And again, in the capital avalanche plan, we use a combination of whole life and indexed UL, IUL. So what she's doing is she's saying, hey, I'm going to do this, create what often you may have heard it called a LIRP, life insurance retirement plan, putting money into this kind of maxed, overfunded life insurance policy to build up the cash value to create tax-free income later. And so that's what she's doing. But again, she's starting up the life insurance policy. She's building it so that she puts in $100,000 a year over the next 10 years into this IUL. So the total amount she's put in is now $1 million. Okay. And we'll talk in a minute about what that does for her down the road. For investor B, he's saying, okay, I like that concept of putting it into this type of a vehicle, the confidence in what it's going to do and how it's going to grow, and et cetera, the kind of the downside protection that IUL gives you, guarantees in this case, because we're going to using a combination of IUL and whole life, the guarantees you get there. And in his case, he's putting the same $100,000 a year over 10 years for a total of $1 million. But let me just explain what's happening in addition to that, where the leverage comes in. Because in year one, he puts his $100,000 into the life insurance policies. Okay, so he's put 100% of it in at this point in time. But then in year two, for that year one policy, the money is continuing to go in 100,000 a year, but now it's coming in from a loan from the bank.
Okay, so maybe can I stop on two things, Rod, and then and we'll get back to where you're at. So two things. First off, when we build the policies, just like with the investment optimizer, it's built in a way that's focused on minimizing cost and maximizing cash. It's super critical that it's built that way. We always do it that way 100% of the time. And I think that was the main thing I wanted to hit on, Rod. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, great point. So we're using that type of policy, 100,000 a year going in. But again, starting in year two, for those initial policies we set up, now that money is coming in as loans from the bank. Okay.
Commonly called premium finance, right?
Yes.
So if you're familiar with that idea, now we're switched to the direction of how it's going, right? One of the things that we love about this concept is that it doesn't require outside collateral like most premium finance designs do. So what we've done is we've created a self-contained premium finance design that's safer and more conservative, but shockingly is actually producing quite a bit more income than the traditional models.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So it puts it in that conservative leverage piece, right? On that side of the line, because of that initial cash value that's created when he puts in his first 100,000, that's why we don't ever have to post any collateral from outside, because as we continue to put money in through the loans from the bank, it's building that cash value. The value that we have in the policy is always staying ahead of any loan that we're carrying in conjunction with that. We always have a positive balance, in other words.
Yeah, I was just going to say a net equity account that always exists. And part of our focus inside this is making sure that net equity stays strong and robust throughout the life of it, so that when we have those ups and downs that are inevitably going to come, we're in prime position to roll through those without much problem.
Yep, absolutely. So, but here's the cool thing. So I talked about where he put in the first 100,000 in year one, and then we financed after that, year 2, 3, 4, 100,000 a year still going in, but we're adding that to the bank. But I'm saying here, he continues putting 100,000 into it. So now we have that first policy from year one. Well, in year 2, we set up new policies. His next 100,000 goes in as year 1 payments on a second set of policies, and then in future years financing. So when we talk about over the course of the 10 years, him putting in $1 million, that's what he put in out of pocket. But if we go back to even just that first one, he put in the first 100,000, but then we financed everything every year after that. So $1 million total went into that first, leveraged off of his original 100,000. And then in year 2, we started again. So by the end, there's $1 million a year going into those policies because of what he created and what we're now leveraging to continue to build.
Okay, so the question is, Rod, what does that mean?
How does it work?
What does
out?
it do for us? That's the question.
Yep. Okay, so our investor A, who's the traditional kind of LERP approach, when she wants to start taking income, we build it on that side. It's an equal income, $102,000 a year of income coming out of it, which she starts at age 60 through age 90. So she gets a total of a little more than $3.1 million of income, tax-free income, right? So not bad, right? And there's an additional death benefit that pays out when she dies at age 90. So the total benefit that she would have received out is a little over 3.4 million, okay, off of the original million that she put in. Okay. Our investor B, who leveraged his policies, when we compare the income that they're receiving at age 65, she's at the 102. Well, he's already far ahead of her at 320,000 in income at age 65, right? And it continues to go up. That leverage, we're continuing to leverage money going into the plan. That allows us to create additional higher levels of income as time goes on. And so he's receiving an increasing income every year. It's going up fairly significantly, so that between 65, where it was at 320, and by the time he gets to age 90, he's actually getting a $1.9 million of tax-free income in that year. Okay. So when you combine all of those years from age 60 to 90, then he received $27.2 million of income, tax-free income. And when he passes away, there's this tax-free death benefit that pays out at $24 million. So the total benefit coming out to him and his beneficiaries is $51.6 million.
That's crazy. So obviously, looking at the numbers, the comparison's kind of wild, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as crazy as it seems. It's just a matter of understanding the math behind it. And if your goal is to either create generational wealth or get to financial freedom faster, then this ends up being one of those strategies that you can put in play that will tremendously expedite that process. So really cool. The numbers are insane. Okay, Rod, we gotta move through some of this stuff. We've got a lot of stuff left.
We're doing it.
Okay, step 3. Okay, so step 1 and 2 we went through. First step is, I got to make sure I go through my steps, Rod. Maximize income. Yep. Step 2, implement conservative leverage. Step 3, invest in alternative assets. We said invest in high quality alternative assets. This is critical. And this was, to be totally honest, like the biggest game changing moment for my wealth building life, I guess we'll say it, because the difference, the ability for us as an organization to grow, and me personally to expedite my growth curve, happened as we started to move away from that traditional place and move into the alternative space, both teaching it and implementing it ourselves. So from that standpoint, it's just like one of the most critical things. Okay, that said, Rod, you talked about risk adjusted return. That's just making sure that you're considering the return along with the risk, right? It's not, you can't look at one or the other to get a great feel for it. You have to be considering both in cohesion to determine if the asset makes sense to invest in. Do you have anything to add on risk adjusted return?
Yeah, maybe just that in the traditional investment world, when people talk about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, they'll have this straight line curve that says the more the higher return that you want to create, the more risk you have to take on in order to do that. And in the alternative world, that's not necessarily the case. With the real estate, especially when you add leverage and some of these other things, you can increase them and create a much larger return than like that, again, that straight line curve, but without taking on undue risk or an excess of risk.
I know thousands of people, Rod, thousands of people that we've met with over the years who would suggest that investing in real estate is far less risky than investing in the market, at least for them. Now, oftentimes, part of the benefit is in the real estate world, we have some control over it that we don't have in the market. But anyway, I think the point there is really important. One of the thoughts here, that one of the things that we've kind of extracted or noticed is just that the people who are ultra successful, they like to have more control, right? We have a lot of DIY wealth builders, but the other piece that we've noticed is that it's often matched to their interests and expertise. And we've seen this with really great clients. I can think of a client here in Utah, John, who I won't use his last name because we haven't asked him, but John, who not only had a traditional practice, but then he started to build other things on top of it. So a second business that was, I'm trying to think of what it's called, Rod, but what's his second business?
Blood infusion.
Thank you. Infusion. So, and he's done incredible with it. But what he's done is he's taken things that he cares about, things that he's passionate about, and he's been able to build on those. And that's just a common thread that we've seen among successful clients.
Yep, absolutely. And Sharon hit on it as well. It's a key thing. If you want to start building your alternative assets, especially as we talked about business earlier, look first at the things that you already know and love and are passionate about and build on that.
One of the other benefits that we get in the alternative space that we don't get in the traditional space is tax savings opportunities. We've talked a lot about this. We won't go into a lot of detail. Certainly, Tom is the best person to talk more about this, but the bottom line is that you'll find as you move into that space, if you haven't been there yet, that not only is the risk adjusted return oftentimes better, but then in addition to that, I've got these tax benefits, potential tax savings that I can't get in other ways. So it's really, really critical that way. Finally, before I give you the case study, Rod, let's talk true diversification. So this is one of those things that I think when I look at it, when I take a step back and look, most people look at their assets as in, the types of things that they're invested in. But one of the benefits of alternative assets is that they're oftentimes hard, real assets. And so we have the opportunity to diversify in an even more meaningful way. Recently, Rod, I bought $100,000 of gold. And while I probably will never use that, it'll just kind of sit and do its thing for a long time. It's nice to feel like another layer of diversification that, you just don't get in by adding mutual funds. And even if I were to add precious metals and mutual funds, it just isn't quite the same as purchasing a piece of real estate that I have control over, or working with buying into a syndication that I have all this opportunity with. So from that standpoint, I love the fact that alternative assets create what we call true diversification. And with that said, Rod, why don't you take us through our case study?
Yeah, the first step in that is we often get asked, okay, well, what are alternative assets? Like, where can I go to capture these? And real estate is the first one. It's probably the biggest one. But we also want to point out, you can invest in real estate in many, many different forms. So Sharon laid out a whole bunch of different ways. And so again, in our case study, we'll get into different ways that Sean has invested and kind of what he likes best. Businesses is another big one. Again, think first about the things that you're already doing, that you already know about, that you have passion on. on that. Life insurance, again, in many forms, in the ways that we've talked about here, but also below we talk about life settlements and other ways that life insurance can create opportunities for alternative investing. Notes, and this includes mortgage notes or hard money notes or all kinds of different ways in debt where you're becoming the lender. Precious metals, you mentioned on that, crypto, and then our last bullet point here, we couldn't like keep going bullet points down the lines, but collectibles, different funds, life settlements, oil and gas, ATM fund, etc. The list goes on, and will continue to grow, especially for the individuals that are out there looking for opportunities. Okay, so let's jump in on our case study, Sean Graham. So again, Sean is a physician, lives down in Baton Rouge, and again, we've worked with him for the last probably 6 years, and seeing kind of the progression of a lot of things that he's doing. But let's start with, to begin with, for his work situation, he's a partner in his own practice. So again, this fits in kind of the S quadrant because he's self-employed. He goes to work every day, but it's also in the B quadrant because he's leveraging the work of a lot of people around him as well. He is a surgeon, and so he bought into the surgical center that he does his work in. And again, that becomes a way of leveraging the who you know and the what you're doing. Someone has to own the surgical center. Why not the surgeons? And I know that that's often the case, but it's often not the case. In his case, he is a partial owner. One of my favorite things for him is that he bought into boats. Again, he's in Louisiana, down on the coast there. He had bought into a fishing charter business, but it is actually a tax play for him, because if he actually owned the fishing charter business, there were less tax opportunities for him than in this case. What he did was he actually bought the boats and then rented them to the charter business, because in doing the rentals, he was able to create a lot more tax benefit in doing that. Again, something he was passionate about. And what's funny about that is that the rental business, it was profitable, but as it turned out, it just so happened his timing was amazing in the boats, because he started getting crazy offers on his boats. Ended up selling one of them because he made a lot more out of it by selling it than he would have by continuing to rent it out. He's Oh, did you have something?
I was just going to tell you, Rod, that we need to keep moving. So less commentary, more point hitting.
Okay. So again, he invests in syndications, syndicated real estate in a lot of different areas, raw land, a medical billing company, again, that's tied to his medical practice, but also a marijuana company, oil and gas, uses the investment optimizer to add that additional layer of profitability we talked about. And he also has a fully funded premium finance life insurance policy, kind of a sister to what we talked about, the capital avalanche. We call it the retirement accelerator.
Yeah, and he's an amazing client, and it really has been cool to watch the progression and of just what he's accomplished. So super cool.
Yeah. And he learned a lot of lessons. Again, going back to control, that's the thing he focuses on right now, is things that he has more control over, and then opportunities that are turnkey. So he's not spending time. He doesn't want to spend time and or having the chance of capital calls. So he's investing in things where that's not having to happen.
Okay, finally, we're going to just hit on these really quickly, and then we're going to jump over to a couple of questions, Rod. So, like I talked about at the beginning, protecting yourself isn't as fun to talk about, but it's every bit as critical as all of the other steps. And so here's just a kind of list of what are those key, most important things to be thinking about. Business entity structure is critical, asset protection in various forms, and you want to have an asset protection attorney to make sure that you're putting in place a strategy that keeps potential lawsuits from your assets. Obviously, death and disability, right? If I die or become disabled, that's a really quick way to stop my generational wealth building in its tracks. But it can also be, and this is kind of interesting way to think about it, it can also be a very simple way to continue on that pathway. So if I plan appropriately and I do the right things, then that generational wealth or financial independence that I'm looking for can absolutely still exist just by putting the right things in place. Similarly with auto, homeowner, umbrella insurance, those are all things that, auto and homeowners are things that the state requires us to have. Umbrella insurance is not, but that one we throw on there because it's so cheap. If you're a high income earner, just having that extra layer, you can get a couple $1,000,000 that will just cover kind of any and everything, and it costs kind of pennies on the dollar. So it's really cheap and worthwhile to have. And then finally, Rod, why don't you just quickly hit on captive insurance, and then we'll answer a few questions.
Yeah, so this will be a teaser. We'll move through it quickly, but captive insurance is just a way to take on or to cover self-insure for a lot of the risks that we face. You still keep the auto homeowners liability type of coverage, but if you're a dental practice and you have liability or risks that you're not insuring against, you can actually self-insure. It creates some amazing tax benefits as the money flows into there. That creates deductions, but it's still capital that you can go out and invest, etc. And then this is the one that I was mentioning earlier. When you combine a captive insurance company with the premium finance concept, then you can actually take, you get that original deduction, which is against your ordinary income. And inside of the captive insurance company, that would normally turn that from ordinary income tax to a capital gains tax, which creates a savings, obviously. But when you combine it, that synergy with premium finance, then it can take that ordinary income down to tax-free. So again, that's
crazy.
Teaser. We won't get into too much more detail on that, but let us know if you're interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, that is crazy. So many people are doing captive insurance companies just because of that initial, well, for the protection first, but then secondly, for the tax benefit, where they're just now having to pay long-term capital gains, but then to take it to another level and remove the tax altogether. It's pretty incredible. Okay, Rod, I'll just roll through these and we'll kind of take them one by one. What sort of investment product are you talking here without paying taxes? Okay, good question. Anonymous attendee, basically we hit on a variation of different things. And so we were kind of talking high level. We talked about life insurance as a way to reduce taxation, real estate, hard assets. All of these things are really great ways to do it because of things like depreciation, which we can take. By doing those types of things in the alternative space. So I guess the easiest way to answer your question is there are many alternative assets that can minimize and reduce taxation, and we would be more than happy to talk offline about what more of those are. But if you look at our list there that we brought up, many of those will do exactly what we're talking about there. Okay, Rod, the next one, why don't you take this one? Will the cost of life insurance increase over time since it's using IUL?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is that as we age, the cost of insurance does go higher and higher. And that's true with IUL, that's true with whole life. But when you look at the actual cost that's inside of it relative to the amount of cash value you have in there, then it becomes very, very small. In other words, when I'm younger, it kind of counterintuitive. When I'm younger, the cost that I'm paying as a percentage of what I have in the cash value is higher than it will be when I'm older. The costs went up, but my cash value is so much higher. And especially when I'm earning the interest on top of that, the cost becomes such a very small amount compared because of the way we build it. That's the critical piece you have to know. We're building it to minimize those costs. That's what keeps them low. If it's not built in the right way, then kind of the implication here where you're asking, well, could the costs outpace things and the growth and whatnot? There are situations where that can happen if it's not built in the right way. But we're minimizing those costs to make it so we don't run into that problem.
And so one of the companies that we use has done a fair amount of research and due diligence on the actual, a company that we work with, due diligence on the costs inside of it. And built correctly, they would suggest that there's about 0.5% cost built into the policy over time. So it actually, if it's built the way that we're talking about, where we're minimizing the cost, we're maximizing the cash, there's very little or there's much less life insurance death benefit that's actually being paid for. And for that reason, the interest on the underlying cash value or interest in dividends will greatly outpace anything that's coming from a cost side. But it is pretty low. Okay. What age did they start again? I think we showed an example of age 46.
Yep. On the Capital Avalanche, it was age 46. And I'll say in conjunction with that, it's usually about from the time you start in Capital Avalanche to the time where we start taking income, about 12 to 13 years, we get to a sweet spot where the income that we start taking off of it can be meaningful, just to give you some context.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Rod, what is the minimum lump sum for the Capital Avalanche? What have we gone with?
Yeah, I mean, we'll custom build it to whatever someone's able to set aside. Like if you're a high income earner, but you're just getting started and you're like, well, all I can set aside right now is 10 to 20 grand or 50 grand or whatever, we're going to optimize the build of the policy to that. So in the investment optimizer, we don't have a minimum. For Capital Avalanche, the minimum is 100,000 as a starting point.
And that's basically because we have other pieces involved, and so that's the point in time where we determine that it makes the most sense to start leveraging it. If you can put that initial 100K in, we can do some really, really incredible things.
Yep.
Okay, Jeff Hadelman says, thanks guys. I just moved. Thanks guys. How are the loan payments being made to the bank every year for the ongoing and new $100,000 loans?
Yeah, the answer is that they're not. So the interest, it becomes an interest arbitrage. So the growth that we're creating inside of our policies compared with the interest that we're going to leave and accrue in the loan, basically the line of credit pays the loan, the payment each year. So we're just capitalizing that interest inside of the loan. But when you look historically speaking, the average would be above 2%. When we run our projections, we use 2% because, again, especially when you take a long period of time, say a 15-year time frame, there's never been a time where we would have had less than a 2% spread between what we're earning in the accounts versus what we're accruing in the interest on the loan. So that's actually the number that we use in our projections.
Yeah, good one. Okay, yep. Well, that was super fun. Thanks everybody for hanging out for us.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights Podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights Podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.